Hi, I'm Wes Allen with DM Tales, and this past week I was able to run Numenera for the very first time, and I wanted to share some of my reflections. Let's roll it. So because this is the first time I am running any Cypher System game, I decided I was going to start small. Just running with 4 players at the time, and the idea is that we're going to learn the system together and get comfortable with it together, and then add some more players to the mix a little bit later on. Some of these may be semi-permanent members of the group, and others might just roll in for an adventure or two and then roll back out again, depending on their schedules. But because by that point we'll have a bunch of more experienced players around the table, it'll be easier to bring people in and out. Kind of like that idea. In order to get started, I did encourage all of my players to get the Numenera Player's Guide, which had been out of print for a while, but I did find a copy at a friendly local gaming store during Free RPG Day, and picked that up as my purchase to get some of the Free RPG Day stuff, and really fell in love with it right away. The Numenera Player's Guide has all the types and foci and descriptors from both the main core books from that 2-box set of Numenera, but it only costs about $20, so you can get that and have all your first tier stuff for your character. And then if you want to buy in the high-end books a little bit later on, you can, but at least you have all the stuff to get started with, and that's really been helpful. It is currently back in stock, and if you want to pick up the Numenera Player's Guide, it costs $7.99 for a PDF, which is not a bad price, and it's something that's worth having for the player to have at hand, or it costs $21.99 for the print and PDF combo. So having all those descriptors and types and foci from both the books is great because you're not limited to just one book or the other in order to start your first tier character. And that's been really helpful for my players. So I had the players make up, not roll up, you don't really roll up a character in this game, but I had them make up their characters separately so I could walk through the process with them. And in order, they turned out to be a Nano, a Glaive, a Jack, which are the 3 types from Numenera Discovery. And then the last player wanted to play an Arcus, which is actually one of the types that comes out of Numenera Destiny. So it's a very good mix and wide range of character types in order to play this game. Should offer a lot of fun ways to do different types of challenges. So character creation is mostly straightforward. It's essentially creating your type and then finding out what your descriptor and your focus are going to be. That's the adjective and then the noun and the verb. Your type is the noun, descriptor is the adjective, and the foci or the focus is the verb. And like I said, it's mostly straightforward, but the one thing I didn't like to start off is there's a lot of flipping through. Once you select your type and then apply your stat pools and then add your extra points that you get as part of character creation to the 3 stat pools as you wish, then you have to go and find your descriptor and your focus. These are in different chapters. And so if you're using the big book especially, you've got to flip through different pages and flip through to see what it is and then write it down on the sheet and then flip through and see what it changes for your abilities and then go through and find out what your focus is going to be and see if that changes any of your ability scores and then whatever special abilities it adds to your character. Starting out, it's a little bit much because you're flipping through 3 different chapters in order to get all of the information onto your sheet. By the time I got to my 4th character with other people, I had done a couple of test runs beforehand, so I kind of knew what to expect. Muscle memory was beginning to take over. And for first tier characters especially, the player's guide came in really handy because the chapters are a lot shorter. In the player character type section, for example, it's only covering tier 1 instead of all the tiers, so it's a lot less pages to flip through. Worked out pretty well, and my players weren't frustrated with the process at all, so it shows me that this is something that at least makes sense to them. And I appreciate it for what they're trying to do. There's a whole lot of options that you can give your character. You're not limited to one type of class. You can construct the type of character that you want to play, and then it has in-game effects on the way that your character interacts with the world. So it works out really well. It just is a little getting used to at the beginning. Character sheets are beautiful for this game. There are a bunch that you can get for free download, both printable and fillable PDF. I think my favorite of the downloadable ones is the trifold version. It just creates a nice little pamphlet that you can carry around to be your character. But it doesn't have a whole lot of space to put your information on, so it's a little limited in that way. The one that is really beautiful is the purple character sheet, which has pretty much all the space that you need in order to put your information in. And the only knock that I would have on it is that some of the descriptor text that are in the boxes to show you which box is what, it's a really light purple, and I would have liked to have seen a little more contrast. It's hard for my older eyes to see, which is one of the reasons why I didn't hand that out right away. Probably my favorite character sheet for Numenera, though, is the character journal, which is not a free download. You do have to buy it. This can be printed out to create a foldable booklet that has a number of pages, plenty of space for all of your information. It gives you space for background, your ciphers, your special abilities, all your different attacks, all your session notes. That's all going to be able to fill in that journal. Really, really cool. And you can buy it and get the printable PDF and the fillable PDF, so you don't have to print it out, or you can buy a pack of 5 off of the Monty Cook website. So if you do that, it costs $1.99 in order to get the downloadable PDF that is both printable and fillable, and it costs $20.59 for a pack of 5. I'm actually considering buying a pack of 5 of these. And the reason why is because the print pages for the printable PDF, they're not a standard size that would print really well on typical letter size American or A4 European paper. Need to go find a specialty paper for that. I haven't been able to figure out which one it is yet. So I used an application called Cheap Imposter in order to impose the pages, that is, put them in the right order to print for booklet, and then create a PDF that has them arranged in a way that looks nice. Most printers can do that right from printing. You just go to the booklet printing option and it should print it out okay, but everything's going to be a little bit smaller than it would be if you get the print copies of the journals. All in all, though, it's a really cool product and a nice addition to the game. There's a lot of thought that went into the creation of that journal, so I appreciate it for what it is and did not really resent having to download it for $1.99 in order to make it available to my players. It's a very nice piece of art. In fact, 2 of my players are using the character portfolio because they like it that much. One of them is using it as digital, and one of them is using a print copy that I printed out for them. And it seems to be working very well. The first major adventure that I'm going to run for this group is one of the ones that's printed in the back of Numenera Discovery. Thought it was a really interesting way to start out. Takes a little bit of pressure off of me, but I wanted to have a way to introduce the players to the world and set the characters in it before we got started. So I took about an hour and I just set out a small town, well, medium-sized town that's walled, that is known as a hub for people who are explorers going out into the 9th world, the setting of Numenera, and looking for ancient artifacts and treasures and knowledge, Numenera, that's out there in the middle of the wilderness. And this is a landlocked city, but because they are so well known for explorers setting out in their different expeditions, there is actually a quarter of the city that is known as the Wharf, which is where the explorers all hang out and where they get different jobs. And for whatever reason, I was expecting that my party would be heading to this town and they would pick up an obligation to a well-known mystic and scholar and entertainer, and they would go off on their journey that would take them to the first adventure. As part of that, I wanted to introduce them to the concept of combat. So I had them get to a point where they were about 3 miles from town. They had misjudged how long it would take to get there, and a figure would dash out of the shrubbery to the side of the road and say, "Oh, thank the aeons, you have to stop them, they're almost here." And then they would hear the sound of multiple creatures crashing through the wilderness, making this chirping, howling sound, like a mix between the two. And that's when all of a sudden a massive pack of 20 broken hounds would show up and threaten to attack the party. And they have one motivation: they hunger for flesh. They're not going to negotiate with these things. They're not going to make friends with them. They see prey, they eat prey, and there's 20 of them, and there's 4 of the player, and the one guy who's been running away is just out of the fight. I thought that would be a really cool way to introduce them to the mechanics of the way that roles work, applying things like effort and edge and how to apply your assets to the different roles. I thought that would be a lot of fun and a way to introduce it to them. And in fact, it did work really well. I'll talk about that in a second. Once I had that encounter, I had the NPC that they needed to meet, and I had a little section of the town that was set up for them to go visit. I was ready to go. And like I said, that took about an hour. Didn't worry about a battle mat, didn't worry about minis, didn't worry about creating maps. All I said was, this is what's happening. And I described the world for people, and we were off. Worked really well. So the first session itself, after I had planned it, was basically a session 0. I wanted to go over a couple of things I was going to be doing at the table, but the thing we really needed to focus on was the basic connections that the different PCs had. So every time you take a type or a descriptor or a focus, there are going to be different ways that that anchors your character into the adventure, hooks them into that first adventure. And each of these items has usually 1d6 that you can choose on. The background information is usually a little bit more for each type, but the other stuff is a 1d6. And my players all looked at that table, said, wait, how many options are there? Here, get me a die. And they all rolled on the table to see what would turn up. So I loved the fact that my party was embracing the randomness of focusing on a character that has this idea that you didn't necessarily choose, it chose you. And they did a really good job. So to go over the characters again in the order that they were created, we started out with Quinn, who is an articulate nano who talks to machines. And when he was rolling up his character connections, he found out that his character had drawn the wrong kind of attention among whatever organization he was part of, and he felt it was a really good time to get out of Dodge. Then we had the glaive Steel, who is a heroic glaive who masters defense. And when he rolled his connection to the starting adventure or to the party, he determined that he was tracking down a dangerous foe, and he had hired the other party members in order to assist him in this effort. That tied really well with the person who's trying to get out of Dodge, and they immediately wove those stories together. Then you had Finn, or Finley Knox, who is an articulate archist who explores yesterday. And he determined, because of his die roll, that he knew Quinn and had actually got into the exact same trouble that Quinn had gotten into, and they were on the run together. They just wanted to lay low for a while to let hotter heads cool down, and they both decided, hey, this option to get away for a while and maybe do something good, that's going to be a good idea. Let's go with this guy. That leads us to Saddlebrook, who is a risk-taking jack who wields power with precision. I love these character types. This is really cool. He actually had rolled up at some point that he was accused of a crime that he didn't necessarily commit. He hasn't decided whether or not he committed that or not by the end of the first session, and I'm going to give him some time to figure that out. But his connection to the starting adventure was that he saw that these 2 other guys were hiring on with Steel, and they thought, this is not a good idea. They're in trouble. And even though I'm trying to lay low because I'm on the lam a little bit, and even though I'm really against my better judgment, I'm going to go along with them because this is not going to end well. One of the other cool things about the role is that he determined that at some point in the past, Saddlebrook and Steel had been on the opposite sides of a battle or a fight. And so they don't quite know if Steel recognizes them. But that's something that Saddlebrook's got in the back of their head at this point. Later on, we find out that Saddlebrook has said, you know what? I used to work for the foe that Steel is tracking, and I've since renounced all that. That's the crime that he didn't commit, that he might be being tracked for. And he had actually fought against Steel at some point in the past. And in some ways, he's trying to make up for past mistakes at this point. Saddlebrook also has noticed that Quinn has a book that he desperately wants to read. Nobody knows why. I don't think the player knows why at this point. He's thinking of it. But every time Quinn said, I'm going to open up my book and look at it really quick, the player who's playing Saddlebrook is like, looking over his shoulder, trying to look into it. It was really fun, and that's going to be a fun way to play out. Just a little flavor to the party. It's really neat to have just a few rolls of the dice and a bunch of people around the table immediately weave together their stories to create this organic bond, even though it happens like that. It was really cool. So once we had all the connections set up and we determined the way that we were going to play the game, I opened up the actual play session and put them in the situation that I had created. They were 3 miles away from town. They had misjudged how long it was going to take to get there. And as they were going through the hamlets, as people were shuddering up for the night, a figure comes crashing out of the woods and screams out, "Thank the Aeons, you have to stop them. They're not even supposed to be here." And out come the 20 broken hounds. Now, I did determine in advance, because of the way that this world works, is broken hounds are a known threat. So if you hear the sound, you know what's coming. And so when I said you hear this chirping, howling sound that's coming from the woods, they're like, "Do we know what that is?" I'm like, "Yes." And I showed them a picture of a broken hound. It says, "This is what's coming out. They hunt in packs." And out they marched out onto the middle of the road, and they were approaching the man, and they had to figure out what they were going to do to try to save this guy, and combat ensued. The way that initiative works in Numenera is you make a roll against the creature's target number, which is 3 times the creature's level. So a broken hound is a level 2, so you basically have to roll a 6 or higher in order to go before it in initiative. That's essentially the way that it works. All my players rolled over a 6, and so they all went before the broken hounds and were able to move really, really fast. However, most of my players do not have ranged weapons. The glaive has an ability called Fleet of Foot, and he ran the short distance out to reach the first of the broken hounds and was able to attack because of it. The Nano has a blast that he can do, and so he unleashed that and actually rolled a 1 and fell on the ground, so that was kind of fun. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And people generally got involved in combat. One of the things that I like about Numenera is it gives you a reason to throw a lot of creatures at the party without just doing it to have XP bloat. So in Numenera, if you have certain creatures that can attack as a pack, they can attack as a higher level creature and do more damage. And that's exactly what I did. There were 20 of them, so there were 4 groups of 5 who were running around, and they were trying to take out this party. And it felt dangerous. People were freaking out, and they didn't take a whole lot of damage because they were rolling really, really well, and they were applying their different skills nicely. So in Numenera, players do all the rolling. So when there's an attack, they have to make a defense roll, and you can actually spend certain parts of your speed score in order to lower the target number that you need to hit in order to defend. And that's what a lot of party members were doing. Yeah, I'm going to put an effort of speed into this, and I'm going to lower it from a level 2 to level 1. Then I just need to beat a 3. Woohoo! And off they go. And it was working really well for them, but it was taking a really long time. And the longer it took, the more the resources they were spending, the less likely it was that we're going to be able to dodge forever. And things felt really, really dangerous. People also were doing a whole bunch of weird, unexpected things. So I had one person land a massive blow on one of the broken hounds and just knocked them completely away from the rest of the pack. That actually reduced the pack from being able to attack as a group. And one player ran over and just jumped on it and held it down and started punching it. And for whatever reason, he was not able to get knocked off. I should have done a GM intrusion about that. We'll talk about that in a second. But it was really kind of a fun, entertaining way for him to get through the battle. The Nano has this ability to blast people and was trying to take out these broken hounds from his friend Finn, and unfortunately he kept on rolling 1s. And a 1 is not only an automatic failure, it puts in this idea of a GM intrusion, which I'll explain a little bit more in just a second. But essentially it unleashes some sort of minor consequence into the narrative that makes it more difficult for you. And so every time he was throwing this mental blast around and it would explode, I'd say, "You misjudged." And it popped up out of the ground after the broken hound, and it knocked Finn on his butt. Didn't take any damage, but now he's down on the ground and he's prone. And all those things worked out so well. It was chaotic. It was a mess. It was dangerous. It was fast. And one of the things that I noticed is that at the beginning, the players were having a very difficult time trying to figure out what it meant to spend their points in order to lower a target number to something that would be easier for them to hit. It had just never been a type of mechanic they had used before. And so at the beginning, it's like, well, you got to do 3 points, but you have an edge in speed, so it's really only 2 points. And what am I doing again? And do I take this from my key number or from the pool number? And it was just confusing to start. By the second or third round of battle, folks were like, okay, I get this. This is what we're doing. I want to lower my number to this target number. All right, I'm spending this many points. Let's roll. Let's go. And that's exactly what happened. And it was really, really cool to see the light of that dawn on people. And now that they're getting the hang of it, the next time we bring somebody else in new, I've got 4 people at the table who will be able to help explain a different type of mechanic that most folks aren't familiar with. So let's talk about GM intrusions, because this is a way for the GM to nudge the narrative in certain ways to increase the tension level, maybe highlight a better way to go at some point, that sort of thing. And it's important to have these in the game because in Numenera, a GM does not roll dice. This is one of the only misgivings I had about the system. Would it still be fun for me if I'm not able to roll dice? And the GM intrusions really make it that type of fun for me. So a GM intrusion is basically like, hey, something is so easy that you're just going to say, you know what? Nope, this time the lockpick fails. This time the rope breaks. This time the door opens and there's an automaton at the other end that was just coming through to do maintenance and it punches you in the face. Like those are the types of things that you can do with GM intrusions. And every time the GM gives an intrusion, he hands the player upon whom it was inflicted an experience point, and that player gets to take an experience point and give it to someone else. Before you say, oh, a single experience point, the basic advancement for Numenera is you have to spend 4 experience points to get one of the advancements to get to the next tier. You only need 16 experience points to get to a new tier, and so 1 experience point is quite a bit as a matter of fact. And what was cool is I only introduced 1 GM intrusion on my own in the combat, because it was right towards the end of combat and things were going really, really well. And someone had a defensive bonus that they had set up and they were just dodging things left and right. Now, you know what? This creature's down to fighting as a single creature at this point. It's not going to do a huge amount of damage. And so I'm going to say, okay, you block the 1, but you overcorrected your shield because it's been going on for a while. You lost track of this other broken hound. It launches out and it gets under, even though you rolled well, it gets under your defenses and bites your shoulder and does 4 points of damage to your might score. And he went, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. And that was neat. It was unexpected that the party would accept that the narrative at that point would make this make sense and embrace the concept. I would have expected a little bit more pushback. It's like, oh, that's not fair. I rolled high. And they went, no, that's great. I took 4 points of damage, got my experience point. I'm going to give this other one over to them. No problem. And if you don't want to take the GM intrusion at some point, the cool thing is that if you have an experience point, you can say, nope, I'm going to keep going this direction. And that didn't happen. So there's a nice balance to the game at that point, which I very much appreciate. But I love the fact that my players embraced the concept. Even though it gave him damage, he's like, yeah, that's fine. No problem. 4 points of damage and let's go. It was really, really cool. And then the other way to include a GM intrusion in the game is if someone rolls a natural 1. My poor Nano rolled a natural 1 twice during this combat, and so that's when I had him knock his friend over. One of the things I think I probably need to improve on is how these GM intrusions impact the combat a little bit more. And it's some first time running the system, so that's not totally unexpected. But when I had the Arcus get knocked down on his butt because the blast exploded in front of him and knocked him prone. Didn't want to do damage to him, but I let him kind of get up that turn and have that be his movement. And I should have said, you lose your action this turn as the wind's knocked out of you. And then, all the Broken Hounds could have had a shot at him with a little bit better chance of succeeding. It's not totally cruel to do, but it would have made a little bit more tension inside the game. So I'm still learning the system, and I think that's something I can do a little bit better to make it fun for everyone, including me. By the end of the night, everyone had gotten the hang of the system and they really had fun. One of my players, the Nano, who rolled 2 ones during the session, told me later on this was the most fun system that he had played yet because he got to roll so many dice, because you're not sitting there in combat waiting for everything else to resolve and then get to yourself again. If a creature attacks you, you're rolling dice. You have to make sure you survive the attack in order to get to your next active turn. He really liked it, and the other players seemed to latch onto it as well. I am so glad I finally had an opportunity to run Numenera. I am looking forward to running it more, and in fact, I have some more Cypher System games to share with the channel. Really looking forward to getting to them. If you've ever been interested in running a Cypher System game or Numenera itself, and you've been kind of thinking that it might be difficult or you're not sure it would be fun, I can tell you I had a blast, and that was with me not rolling dice, which I do admit felt a little weird setting up the table and not having my dice tray there, but I was involved in the game really, really deep, and it was a blast. Try it out if you've been thinking about it. Coming up on the channel, I do indeed have Dragonbane Red. I am working on my review this week and hope to film it next weekend to have it out by next Monday. The cool thing is I have actually gotten through Fantasy Age 2nd Edition a lot faster than I was expecting. I should be able to have that review ready to go the week after that. Normally, I've been trying to skip weeks between my reviews, but I was able to get through it really well. And I think it's a system that is simple enough and fast enough that I can review it rather quickly. So I'm looking forward to getting that out to you as well. I have a couple other live stream interviews that I am working on getting set up. And when I do, I will let you all know. But until we see each other again, folks, happy playing, everyone.